Mr. Chairman, last year during a pretty fierce budget debate that we had in this committee, the Obama administration quietly requested an additional $100 billion loan from us to the IMF. And while I and other Republicans raised concerns about this, opposed this measure, over our objections, that provision passed, and our exposure to the IMF grew. I took issue with this very provision then, and I do today for several reasons. First, we have near trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see, and things continue to get worse. The government has spent or guaranteed about $8.2 trillion to prop up our economy in the last 2 years. While we were over-leveraged pre-crisis, this drastic spike in taxpayer liabilities is a Trojan horse that has put us on a Greek-like course. Just last month, the federal budget deficit at $82.7 billion hit an all-time high for April. It was $53 billion higher than economists had predicted. As Chairman Bernanke has repeatedly said to us, this path is unsustainable. Second, the IMF has a poor track record when it comes to dealing with sovereign debt crises. Over the years, the IMF has developed into a dependence-inducing crutch used by weaker countries to avoid making the tough decisions necessary to get their fiscal houses in order. More than 70 nations have already depended on IMF aid for 20 or more years. They just keep rolling over and increasing the debt. 24 countries have received IMF credit for 30 or more years. In many ways, the IMF has been as much part of the problem as part of the solution. Lastly, the possibility of contagion puts potential U.S. liabilities through the roof. Just within the IMF-EU proposal, U.S. exposure is roughly $54 billion. Looking at the global debt issues, things could get much worse. According to recent CDS spreads, 8 of the 10 riskiest sovereign debts in the world reside outside of the EU. Where will the IMF be when those countries move to the brink of default? Given these factors, the U.S. needs to look at reducing its exposure to the IMF. No loan, however large, will solve Europe's problems. It will simply delay and weaken the appetite for necessary change. The promise of a never-ending European welfare state is at the heart of the crisis. For decades, governments overcommitted and failed to pay for these entitlement programs, which led to a sea of debt. The irony that an institution of which we are the greatest contributor is going to rescue countries drowning in debt is apparent. Now is the time for us to address our own budgetary crisis and put our economy back on a path toward prosperity. The longer we delay, the closer we will get to being the United States of Europe. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.